Hello, folks. It's me again, Duncan. Getting into another part two of what we discussed last time, which was whether NDEs, near death experiences, and religion can be reconciled because so many seeming conflictions between those two subjects. Uh, Last time, I found there's a lot of common ground between religion and NDEs, and I just did my best to discuss what I've kind of concluded after listening to hundreds of NDE stories, and I wasn't sure where I was going to go next because I felt like I sort of spilled what beans I'd gotten on that subject. And interestingly enough, a little time goes by, and my typical, I know I'm a little bit sporadic with what I share because I'll think about something and ruminate about it a bit, and then a week or two will go by, and then I'll suddenly get a burst of inspiration, usually when I'm out hiking or something, and all of a sudden, a few days back, I just was overwhelmed with a new round of what to me is revelation in terms of what I want to share. And in some weird ways, I don't know where this comes from. I can't necessarily say it's my own mind or whether it's some other source. I don't think I'm channeling anyone. I don't look to channel anyone. I just want to actually gain wisdom. I feel like, the statement from the Bible that says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." To me, freedom is understanding. I've never been a person that liked it, even going through school. I didn't like to be given formulas and just told to plug numbers into them because that seemed like a kind of a cheat. I didn't really understand the process. Once I understood the process and knew why, then it meant something to me to use the formula and plug numbers in because I knew it worked and I felt like I had an understanding of it. And needless to say, people that think the way I do get baffled in a world of technology where we're constantly using things like computers and new cars that we really don't understand. How they operate is beyond me in a lot of cases. But that said, this NDE thing and just seeking wisdom along spiritual lines is fascinating, and it's helping really ground me just to know what I actually believe and why. And for those of you that think along similar lines and want to actually understand things, these studies are very interesting because I felt like this has been extremely eye-opening and changed my philosophy of life. And now I'm kind of digging down to figure out what's true, what isn't true. And without belaboring further, I'm going to attempt to cover a fair amount of material here. And based on the NDE experience and what I know of religion, I grew up in a Christian environment, mostly studied a few other religions, and I see a lot of commonality. There's a lot of things recorded in the Bible and in other religions that do correspond to what's brought back from the other side by people that have had near-death experiences. And I am attempting to tie this together to reconcile it, and I'm believing that it's beginning to make sense, that these things can be reconciled. And I've created something, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call the Enlightenment model, and or connection, where the subtitle would be connections, because people on the other side that have come back from a near-death experience very often report that everything is connected and that there's a great sense of love and connection and that we're all one. That's a huge takeaway, that we're all one, we're all connected, and that over on the other side, communication is telepathic, it's instantaneous, things happen fast. And on that side, there is nothing negative. And I'm going to go further into talking about that. I'm going to show, I just drew a little hasty, kind of sketchy diagram. Sketchy might not be the right word. It's a sketch. Sketchy, hopefully not. Anyway, I'm going to hold this up and just explain this a tiny bit. So, coming from people that have had near-death experiences, many of them report that there's basically, on the other side, everything is love. And love is a constructive, blissful, wonderful, joyous state to be in. The opposite of that, we think of love versus hate. The way it's reported on the other side is that basically it's fear is the other paradigm. There's two basic paradigms that operate on the earth. And over here, because of things I'm going to discuss shortly, we are born into a world, and fear is a predominant paradigm here because we've come from complete comfort and bliss and provision and everything wonderful, and we land on this earth and it's very much not that way, and there's a great deal of fear and insecurity that gives rise to hate and all the other things on the negative spectrum. And I know that sounds oversimplistic, but I will attempt to show that love is the constructive, positive form of motivation that exists on the other side, and that our goal here, at least for me, is to move from fear to love, and thus be able to be successful and functional on the earth in spite of the uncertainties and the fact that the earth school here is a mixture of love and fear and all the resulting positives and negatives. So it's not all bad, it's not all good. And my hope, and the hope of many of us, is that we're evolving toward living in love versus fear. And I think that we are moving in that direction. And I feel like that right now there's a lot of people that are getting information and experiences that are leading us toward understanding. And I guess my bottom line premise is simply this, is if we understand how this works and make a choice to move in love in all of its manifestations, we have the choice of moving ourselves and the world forward in terms of escaping the bondage of fear and moving into love. And if a large enough quorum or number of people are moving in love, we begin to have more and more of an influence. And we've seen pockets of that over time in history where, like even in countries, in isolated groups of people, we can achieve levels of love in some churches, some religions, families, marriages. The love can manifest if people are in agreement and moving in the same way. On the other hand, there's a lot of fear and negativity that manifest. And even in the church world, I've seen this principle play out where one church can be really governed by love and the positive things and become very joyful, help people. On the other hand, there are churches that move in fear and separation, and a lot of damage results. And we can, once you understand some of these principles, we'll be able to recognize some of these things and basically walk out of them and escape them and move toward the things that are positive. So anyway, I'm going to hold up this little poster, and it's just showing up a very simple model. And I'll hold it up so I think it'll show. Okay, so fear on the one side is an extreme that governs a lot of earthly life and a lot of people, a lot of organizations. It's behind war and dissension and all the kinds of things. You can see on the fear side, we're born here, and in the most negative light, there's separation, complete separation. Everybody's an isolated individual, and this gives rise to competition and separation and fear and insecurity and a lot of things I'm going to discuss shortly when I take this poster down. I'm going to kind of go through my notes a little bit so I don't miss anything. It's kind of a fairly complicated subject in a way. So on the other extreme, we have love. And so in an ideal, perfect world, as the one that's described on the other side, love is the paradigm that governs there completely. There is nothing negative over there. And in this paradigm, all of us are connected. You can see all those circles intersecting with all the other circles. We're all connected. Every one of us are connected to nature, or connected to animals, plants, trees, the ecosystem. And we're all part of one giant whole that is referenced by some as God or source or whatever. So to me, it's like we're all actually part of and manifestations of the one creative force that's out there. And so that's one extreme. It's the good extreme. It's where we go in many NDEs will say between lives, we exist on the other side, and our higher self is basically always operating on the other side in some sense. And a part of us is here living this earthly life to learn from it. And of course, in the middle, we see a kind of a mixture of both fear and love operating. So we do have, you'll see those little diagrams, basically are isolated groups of people. Could be a family, a marriage, a business association, a church, a country. That's why we have things like nationalism. We represent and love and interact within our group. We support our group, but we may be in conflict with other groups. We don't realize we're all one. We see them as competition or as opposition. So the earthly life involves a lot of terrible waste and damage and wars and all these negative things, simply because we've evolved to a point of wanting to stick up for our own group and ourselves and yet not realizing we're basically all one, and we have more in common than we do to separate us. But the delusion is that, we have to fight, that there's a lack, that if one person wins, another loses. There's a lot of things. There's plenty out there. That's the message that Jesus used to preach. There's plenty out there. We can live a life of plenty for everybody. But because of competition and war and all these things like that, we don't realize that. And, we're fighting for things. We're fighting for push our belief system, not realizing that if all of us believed in what the people bring back from near-death experiences, we probably, unless somebody deliberately wills to be evil, I think we understand, most of us have the capacity to understand that in the end, we are all one. What we do to others, we actually are doing to ourselves. Near-death experience people have testified that during their life reviews, that they basically get to experience their effect on others from the other side, seeing how they affected other people. And if we realize that we are actually going to be accountable, not even just to God, not a judgmental God, but basically being judged by ourselves and aware of our own impact on others, we basically are given freedom and a certain amount of sovereignty. And how we affect the world and affect others, we're really doing it to ourselves, since we're all connected. So having that said, I'm going to jump into my notes here. I'll try to stay on track. So I'm going to start out with starting with the fear paradigm. We've come from the other side, supposedly. Even if we hadn't, if you're born into a world where you may be born into a poor family or into a rough climate or a rough situation, there's plenty of reason for fear. We all have needs, and when we're young and small, we need to have our needs met. And the best thing we can land in is a place where people care and will be nurtured and taken care of, protected, da da da. But that's not always the case. So I'm going to read a list of fear and the products of fear. Like, in other words, there's fear and there's love. Those are the headings on the two paradigms. And under fear, so we've left bliss, joy, peace, security, and we land here as a separate individual. And one of the conditions of being on this earth is we forget any past lives we've had, so that won't pollute our experience here and diminish the learning that we're supposed to experience. So we're a separate individual without recall of our past, and into a mixture of fear and love and everything in between. So here's some of the things that characterize the fear paradigm. And this is the extreme, because I always feel like two extremes, it's the dichotomy. We have fear versus love. So in a world of fear, what we're dealing with is one of the greater fears is simply the fear of the unknown. And we experience it all the time. Like, if I have a problem, the other day I had a problem getting my scanner working. It had been working, everything had been working, and all of a sudden my scanner wouldn't work and I needed it. And it took me several hours to figure out what was wrong. But just the anger that arose out of my fear of the unknown, like, all of a sudden I'm staring at a machine, I can't make it work right, and it's driving me crazy, and I just want to break things. And then I'm like, that won't fix it. I could buy a new one and hook that up, but I wouldn't have learned how to deal with this one. That would be a waste. So ultimately I kept at it until I literally had given up. And then the very last thing that occurred to me to do actually worked and got it working. But fear of the unknown just produces a spate of negative consequences. So in the world of fear, fear produces isolation. As an example myself of if somebody plunked me in the middle of the woods, I live up in Vermont, it's beautiful up here. I'm more at peace living in the woods under a tarp and dealing with animals and nature than I am if I were plunked in the middle of a city. And when I was a kid, this was true too. The utter feeling of isolation, like it's not a world that I'm familiar with or comfortable with. So immediately fear rises up, and distrust, and a feeling of isolation. Even though you can be surrounded by thousands of people, you can feel terribly alone if you don't feel connected to any of them. So that's a producer of fear. So in fear, we can feel isolated, disconnected. There's coldness, a lack of affection, distrust, defensiveness. People in fear, relationships are transactional. If we don't trust people, then we feel like we need to be in control, and control is a big product of fear. When people feel they have to control everything, you can't relax and go with the flow. And I think this gives rise to a lot of the top-down authoritarian controlling thinking that goes into a lot of organizations, countries, religions, or whatever. If there's not trust, then people feel like they have to control the situation or control others. And you have laws, externally enforced rules and laws to keep people in line. And on the other hand, I'll jump over to this just to connect it, is on the love side. When you have love, you have mutual respect, you have trust, you have a feeling of security. You don't need to defend yourself against people. You don't need locks. You don't need passwords. You trust people. Everybody's operating in love. And as a result, there's peace, there's freedom, and there isn't a need for this authoritarian type of control. So, as a warning, like in religions, cults, nations, organizations where there's extreme emphasis on control and top-down domination, that's usually indicative of fear. People have to be kept in line, strict punishments and laws and discipline and all these things that are required when people are living in fear, or at least they think they're required. So there's the defensive mentality. People are under surveillance very often, like in cults, there's a snitch culture, people spying on people. And again, when there's no trust, there has to be contracts, lawyers, rules, laws, security systems. And also there's selfishness. People are looking out for their own interests, competition for resources, land, property, anything, mates, whatever. Competition arises between people, and even wars, like in the paradigm of fear, war with all of its waste and destruction is a consequence of people feeling like they have to go up against others. And it can be religious. Religion is a huge source of disagreement in war, because one person thinks they've had the revelation that, and their God is the God, and therefore it's an exclusive religion. They got to push on other people and try to take control and dominate. So all of this exists where there's no love. Now, on the love side, on the other side, people report from near-death experiences that all communication is telepathic. So one of my frustrations, and I don't know if this arose from from being on the other side before I was born, I don't remember, I don't know, but I consider it a reasonable thought that part of the frustration I find on this earth is when people just don't get it, or you have a hard time connecting. Some people you just can't get on a wavelength with, but yet I've met people, and it happens frequently, where you just suddenly know, you talk to somebody for a minute and you immediately know you could just hand them your wallet and keys and walk away and never worry. You know they have integrity, you know you can trust them. There's almost like a telepathic thing happening, but you can't really call it telepathy. It's just a sense, it's a gut feeling. And that's a great feeling. I'm like, yeah, that must be what it's like on the other side. If you can innately trust people and communicate telepathically, then everybody around you could be trusted inherently. And there's no need for any of the inefficiencies of this earthly life in terms of even the simple things like door locks and passwords on your computer. If you live in a place where it's complete trust, there's none of the inefficiency or waste, surveillance systems and all these means of tracking and analyzing and accountability. I mean, if you trust that every person is doing their best and moving in love and doing what benefits everybody, like knowing we're all connected, you will act toward the benefit of everybody, toward the greater good. And you know what you're doing to others and for others, you're really doing for yourself, because you're a collective, you're all one. And like some people would scream out and argue, oh, that's socialism or whatever. Well, in a weird sense, call it what you want, but in a world where there's love and cooperation and everybody's working for the common good, you're doing it voluntarily. That's one of the things that differentiates the fear paradigm from the love paradigm, to me, one of the huge ones. And this is substantiated by even the Bible. I mean, Jesus himself said that, the Gentiles lorded over their people. The leaders of the Gentiles lorded over them. They have the top-down authoritarian structures. they have to impose rules and laws and enforce them externally. Jesus also said that the laws would be written on people's hearts ultimately. And simply, my interpretation of that is simply that people will want to do what's right. They'll do it voluntarily. So a lot of people feel like their freedom is threatened when even things like this are said, is because if you're doing it voluntarily and willingly, then you're not a slave. You're not losing your freedom. You want to do what's right. You're doing it because of the love in you that motivates you to, and you don't have to do anything. And that's the other thing. God respects our sovereignty. And Jesus quoted Psalm 82 saying, "You are God's." In other words, God gave us freedom. He created us to be free beings. And he said, and the church is not supposed to be this top-down authoritarian structure where you're being controlled, threatened, da 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 da. So here we go with the NDE versus religion thing. My attitude is true religion, as created by God, gives us our freedom and our sovereignty. So we choose to do what we do. And the fact the world is such a messed up place largely is because we're here to learn, and we do have freedom, and we can make a mess of things. We can create what we call terrible karma, even though karma is a kind of one of those questionable words. Does it really exist? Well, in a sense, not necessarily will everything you do be returned on you in this life, but you, during a life review, when you pass away from this life, you'll never die. You'll see your impact on other people. So that will be the place where you do your learning. And you won't be being harshly judged, thrown into hell, any of this. Apparently, a lot of the things that people are told are not true. People may have meant well. They may have thought they were hearing from God. But I mean, I consider it reasonable to think that there's been a number of people who have come up with religious concepts and ideas and claim to hear from God that came up with bizarre things we could easily write off as crazy. But I think even in the Christian faith, a lot of things that were either added to the Bible or put in the Bible to begin with by people, it may have served their interest to put some things in that gave them more control. There's a lot of control. There's a lot of use of fear in the church. There's obviously a lot of things that I would filter out and say, well, these things are not compatible with what people report coming back from near-death experiences where everything is love and bliss. And I mean, even Paul wrote in Corinthians 13, the love chapter, that love was long-suffering, patient, forgiving, kept no record of wrongs. Now think about that one line, keeping no record of wrongs. If God keeps no record of wrongs, then how is he going to judge people and throw them in hell? That would be highly inconsistent. But if you have a life review and you get to see how your life impacted people throughout your life, and you're not even being judged or threatened, it's for your own education. You're feeling what other people felt, you're experiencing their pain, and you're knowing what you did to other people. And this is whether it's good or bad. It's not a negative thing necessarily. You get to learn from that experience and how God compensates, or how, people that were victims. I mean, being a victim and having to forgive, that is very difficult. And I don't claim to understand that completely, but I think in the end, love is, even the Bible says love conquers all. And I believe that love is the only force powerful enough to take a person that had done terrible things throughout their life and have them realize that they can see their impact and see the fact they're connected to everything and everyone else. And having that experience may be sufficient to turn them from what they were doing. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my notes. So I'm pretty good at going off track and going way off on tangents here. So the mixture. Okay, so I'm going to hit a few more things that have to do with fear. So I feel like so fear can breed control, dictatorships, top-down authoritarianism, tyranny. People that want control over other people, and some, of course, there's all kinds of aberrations that are basically fear-based. People want, and there's ego, there's everything else. People want to have control, they become greedy. I mean, on the other side where there's love and there's a feeling of security, then people don't need to hoard things, to become greedy and store up excessive amounts of money, to lord it over other people. And here's some of the things that are aberrations based on fear. Hoarding, it's based on insecurity. You're afraid you won't have enough resources, enough money. Even things like overeating, excessive drinking, drug abuse, escapism, crime, this drives people. And in the fear paradigm, there's a zero-sum mentality that basically says that people feel like there's only so many resources out there, and if I win, you've got to lose, and if you win, I lose. So it kind of sets up a win-lose competition mentality versus cooperation. Now, the in-between paradigm is the mixture, which I would call partial enlightenment. There's a certain amount of connection and love within groups, couples, marriage, families, clans, religions, churches, races, nations, clubs, businesses, neighborhoods, sports fans, musicians and their followers, etc. So those are all areas where there's groups that can manifest love within that group, but they may be up against other groups. And there's of course friendly competition that's perfectly normal, like playing sports. It makes the teams better when they're competing. There's no hate involved necessarily, but competition between the groups can turn ugly, us versus them, people seeking the good of their own group or groups, but with disregard for the larger group that we're all part of. Nationalism falls into this category. We're fighting for our nation, patriotism, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. We're sticking up for beliefs we believe are right, but again, we can be clashing with others. Religious clashes and competition, war over land, resources, and control politically, and all this. So we're in this mixture, and it's because we're disconnected. We don't realize we're all part of the same whole. We can't sit down at the table and say, wait a minute, we're all in this together, when we really are. And we're all made of the same material. Our blood is red, our body temperatures are similar. We're pretty much the same. And what if we understand that that's the truth, and that we're basically doing to others Jesus said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that's enforced in a sense by becoming our own either victims or our beneficiaries, as life does, as we see eventually what we've done to others. And there's another scripture in Romans that I read recently because I was doing a little bit of studying. I think it's Romans 13:10 says, love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore it's the fulfillment of the law. I hadn't seen that one. I hadn't really flagged that one before, but that's perfect. Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore it's the fulfillment of the law. So what more do you need? The golden rule, that's kind of a form of the golden rule. So let's go to love, and this would be the paradigm that's positive and constructive. And in the NDE world, people discuss vibes, and I don't really get this entirely, but the low vibe things are usually the negative things. The high vibe things are considered to be the positives, and the stronger, better things. The earth is kind of a slow moving, material, heavy, kind of sluggish, low vibe environment for the largely, although there's exceptions such as nature and beauty and a lot of the positives that we can kind of benefit from engaging in when we're here. I've discussed that more in other recordings, so I won't go into that. So here are some of the characteristics of love, that all are connected, and this means people, animals, plants and trees, planet, ecosystem are all parts of a whole. And in the love paradigm, the laws are written on our hearts. In other words, we're motivated by love, the constructive and creative power that seeks the good of all. And we live by the golden rule. And for myself, I've seen, you recognize if you start searching your own patterns, you'll see the patterns that you fall into, whether they're good or bad. And you knowing how this works, I find it much easier to step away from some of the negative things that I've been walking in. And again, this is an ongoing thing, it's not just a study. It's basically, this is a seeking of the truth to make my own life better and have a better impact on people around me. And then I do feel compelled to share this. I feel like it's been shared with me from whatever source, and I really want to see the world be a better place. So what I can do is try to spell this out and make it understandable, and anybody that's open to it hopefully can get a little bit out of what I'm sharing here, because this is kind of the state of the art of where I'm at personally. So in love, there's trust, there's empathy, the ability to understand and perceive where other people are coming from so you can meet their needs, cooperation versus competition. Like in other words, we can work together to achieve things. We're not in competition. There's plenty. We live in that paradigm of plenty. There's enough to go around. You think of the amount of money that's wasted on war and destruction. It's not necessary. It just isn't necessary. It could be going to better uses. In love, there's peace, there's altruism, there's plenty, there's generosity, healing, and just being positive and moving in love actually produces healing, and it keeps our immune system stronger. So, somewhere it says a merry heart doeth the body good. Like, in other words, if we're happy, if we're at peace, then our bodies will respond to that. A lot of maladies and diseases, especially immune compromised situations, that feeds off of mental and emotional maladjustment, and people that are sad, depressed, down. It weakens your whole system. So we move in love. We're willing to invest in other people. We're secure in ourselves. We don't need to worry about whether our needs are met. We believe they will be. We know they will be. And a lot of people in the NDE world discuss, being able to manifest things, manifest healing, manifest, prosperity, whatever. And when we're moving in a positive mindset, we actually see opportunities. We can meet the opportunities. We're not compromising our health with drugs and alcohol because we don't need to. I feel happier now than I ever have, and it took a few years, like a lot of years, to get to a point where, I have a few beers here and there, but I don't feel compelled to get drunk or, take drugs or any of that. I don't, I know if I feel that would be a temptation, that means there's something else wrong that needs to be resolved, because those are dead ends that don't go anywhere good, as we know. So when we feel peace and security, and we agree we're all in this together, there's no need for war and it's waste and destruction. And we become protective and nurturing. We want to see other people do well. So we have affection. When we're moving in love, there's affection, there's hope, there's joy, there's honesty, there's a respect for the truth, there's humility, there's trustworthiness, there's forgiveness, there's patience. Stealing from the love chapter is not being easily angered, not self-seeking, keeping no record of wrongs. Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore it's the fulfillment of the law. So in this world, we work toward the common good. We take care of the environment. We're stewards of what we're given here. We're connected to it. We're part of it. What we do to others, we do to ourselves. And a note I made to make a point of here, dealing with the NDE versus church thing, is that churches can be characterized primarily by love or by fear, and they can do great good or they can do great harm. And I will say I had a spiritually transformative experience, is the term that I'll use, at a church when I was much younger, and my life had kind of gone off the rails and was a wreck. And this was, when I was like in my 20s. I think I hit a low point where I actually was considering offing myself because I was so miserable, had had a relationship fail, my job had failed, I was just in a pit. And I literally was told to show up at a certain church I'd been to once a year before with an ex-girlfriend. And I actually got up on a Sunday morning and I drove down there, and I was utterly hopeless. So I just felt like I had nothing to lose. I walked into a building where I knew not a soul. I got about halfway down the aisle and I melted. And literally, the only way I can describe it is that it was almost like a cascading wave in the ocean of love that poured over me. And at the time, I didn't understand what it was, but I was knocked. I was completely undone. And I'm like, I was glad I didn't know a soul there, because I bawled like a baby. I walked out of there later and everything was different. I had music going through my mind, through my head for months. And I felt like new hope. Everything changed. And I felt like the creative force God met me there. That was amazing. And I obviously never forgot that. And I didn't know much about religion or church or anything then. I hadn't really experienced anything direct like that. But there were a lot of really solid people in that church that moved in love. And therefore, I think that had created like a loving environment where these people interacted. And they were solid, trustworthy, good people. There was a men's group I was part of. And I've been through a number of churches. I ended up many years later in a cult, and it was because I was really wanting the truth and to know more. There's a lot of people in the religious world that will claim that they have the truth and they're closer with God, and if you want to be in the inner circle, follow them. And that turned out to be a fiasco, and it was a fear-based church environment. It really was. The first one was very much predominantly a love situation, and the critical, judgmental type of church. Run, don't walk, get out of it, get away from it. When you have top-down authoritarian leadership, a snitch culture, a lot of judgment and criticism, gossip, those are all characteristics of the cult church I got involved in. And when my wife and I realized it after quite a few years, 17 years there, we realized something was terribly wrong, and we knew it, and you could feel it, but it was very hard to put your finger on, because people will point out, they'll go through the Bible, they'll pick out scriptures, and they'll justify their position very well. And they'll use the Old Testament and tell you God's judging you and you're wandering in the wilderness for another 40 years, 400 years. You can't get your heart right. You got to perfect yourself. You got to purify yourself. All this dogma that sounds right and just produce misery and guilt and fear and all this negative crap. So where I'm coming from now is I rejected all that. And this NDE study was vastly refreshing to me, because I believe, and I'll hold to this, I believe that the only legitimate motivation is love, and everything else, there's a lot of people doing works that are, and Jesus himself talked about that, works, people doing things. People obey all these rituals, they go to churches, they give money, they do a lot of things, but it's not based on love. They're not doing it because they want to, they're doing it because they feel like they have to. It's their duty. And I would say confidently that if it's not love that's motivating you to do things, question what is. Because if you're governed by a form of fear, fear of judgment, fear of being thrown in hell, fear of being, rejected, or just feeling guilty about things, if you're driven by avoidance of guilt or any of this stuff, get out from under it. Even if you're doing things for other people's approval, question that. It's really all about love, and really love comes from asking for it, knowing that it's the real positive motor that makes life worth living and happy. But that's the thing that should be ruling our lives. That's what's going to lead us to a place of caring about other people and really wanting to help them, and ultimately making the world function the way it's supposed to. So this earth is, I've bought into this idea. It's a learning experience. It's a earth school. And the idea is to go from fear into love. And ultimately, like, there's people that describe Jesus and others as ascended masters that have learned these lessons and come to an understanding that we're all one and we're all in this together. And when you reach that level, my hope is, I asked God years ago, I said, don't let me leave this earth without achieving what I'm here for. I really want to learn what I'm here to learn. I know there's something, and I know I'm not complete, and I'm not, like, when I was younger, I had an older brother that was mentally ill, and that was very difficult because I saw the world as a kind of dark, fearful place, because he struggled to get through life, and it was very difficult to follow him as a younger brother. So that put me on a path of wanting to understand what life's really about. And I'm 65 now. I'm at a point where I feel like I'm finally getting it. The last year or so doing this NDE study has really opened my eyes to a whole world of things I didn't know or understand, that at this point I'm extremely glad that I got into this little bit of research. And it's not just a study, but it's become a life-changing experience. And I'm wanting to share it just because I feel like if it's done as much as it has for me to know this material, if you're open to this same type of material. I think the other thing that I get encouragement from is the NDE world. There's lots of people out there that are getting similar understanding, revelations, whatever you want to call it, and sharing it. And I have not had an NDE myself, but yet I get it. I totally buy into it. And a lot of these people have had NDEs. That's why they're sharing their stories. I'm sharing as a non-NDEer that believes in this, and I'm having a positive effect on me. So anyway, I'm going to just hit a few more notes here, and then I'll wrap this up, because I just want to get this all out there. So churches can be characterized by love or fear. Much of the New Testament is substantiated by NDEs. Jesus, angels are an evidence. They talk of spirit guides and all, and the angels basically are to serve us. They look out for us, they help us, they guide us, they protect us. And this is great stuff, because a lot of what was told when I was a kid in Sunday school, a lot of it seemed like too good to be true, and like just fantasy stuff. But a lot of it's actually substantiated by NDE. So I take some hope in all of that. Again, the church is not supposed to be an authoritarian, legalistic, fear-driven organization where there's just enforcement of rules and regulations, and we're threatened with hell and damnation, all this stuff. That's not what's reported. NDEers basically say we're not. There is no hell. We never die. We're eternal beings, and the judgment we face is our own judgment of ourselves, and we're guided in understanding and learning from our experience here. So if people go into what they call the void, or sort of a bad place between lives or whatever, it's sort of almost like we do have more control than we think. So people that do bad in this life and reject good and reject love, they can end up in a bad place in a void. The idea, the theory, is that over time we will all learn and eventually get there. And some of us slow our own development and growth. My attitude is I don't want to go through any more suffering. Honestly, I really don't. I'd be very happy if this was the last life I needed to live out on this planet in order to get it straightened out. The idea of being on the other side or living lives at a higher level than this earth, I'm all in for that. I think that's great. So today, it's a mixture. It's a learning experience. We're evolving toward enlightenment. Knowing the truth will set us free. I feel like most of us, want to spread the word as we're enlightened and learn more, because it's making us happier and making life better. And we really want to see the earth and this whole experience become a better experience. So we'll have a more peaceful world. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to share today. I really feel like there's a great amount of information to support this. And rather than just listening to hundreds of NDE experiences, which are very similar, my emphasis is more to say, well, what can we take out of this? What can we go forward with? How can this change our present lives? We're here on the earth right now. We need applicable information that we can use in our lives and take with us going forward. So I'm trying to extract that, kind of like making coffee. You put the grounds in the basket, and the water goes through and it takes out the coffee. So all listening to NDEs and watching them and reading and studying about NDEs, it to me is, this is all the coffee grounds, and I'm pouring the hot water through it and trying to say, what can we take out of that and drink that will taste good and help us moving forward. So I don't know what I will go to next, but I'm hoping this maybe answered a few questions. And this is what I have right now. One of these days, I've been putting this off because I felt like I hadn't hit a point of stabilization where I felt comfortable doing this, but I want to do some lives and bring people in to talk and ask questions and share their experiences. I just felt like I had to get to a certain place where I felt like I actually knew what I was talking about. So at this point, I feel a little more confident in that. And I hope when that happens, hopefully soon, that you'll join in that. And if you've ever had an NDE or have a spiritual experience or an opinion about this, something you'd like to share, I'd love to do some live interviews and such with people that are interested. I've had a few come forward mentioning they would. And I apologize to those that I've put off. I felt like I needed to get to a certain point where, I'd be comfortable doing that. So anyway, have a great day, and hope feel free to leave comments too. I mean, if you are listening to this and have made it to the end, then thank you. And if you have comments, questions, or whatever, I'd love to hear from you. And other than that, take care, and we'll see you again soon.